She poured herself a glass of Cabernet, the good stuff from their private cellar, the bottle he'd flown in from Napa just last week. It was a Tuesday night, quiet, the kind of silence that usually felt peaceful after the chaos of running a billion-dollar foundation. But this silence was different. She'd come home early from a gala in the city, a headache she couldn't shake, and now she stood at the base of the staircase, her eyes fixed on the sliver of light spilling from beneath the master bedroom door. The door that should have been locked. The door he always kept locked when he was working late. Her husband, Richard Harrington, the man who built a logistics empire from a single truck into a Fortune 500 giant, the man who promised her forever in front of 1,000 guests, was in their bed. And he wasn't alone. She could hear the muffled sounds, the low whispers she recognized, the laugh that followed, a sound she'd heard her whole life. It was the laugh of her little sister, Lauren. And in that single moment, standing there in the dark with the weight of that crystal glass in her hand, Eleanor Harrington didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't kick the door down. She did something far more terrifying. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine, turned around, and walked back down the stairs. She climbed into her car, a silent black sedan, and drove away into the Connecticut night, leaving them to their secret. They thought they had won. They thought she had run away with her tail between her legs. They had no idea that Eleanor Harrington had just begun to fight. They had no idea that the woman they had just betrayed was about to methodically, quietly, and with surgical precision, burn their world to the ground. This is the story of how the wife didn't just get even, she got everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. To understand how Eleanor Harrington dismantled an empire, you have to understand the empire itself. Richard Harrington wasn't born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He was born in a small town outside Pittsburgh, the son of a steelworker who taught him that the only person who would ever give you anything was yourself. By the time he was 30, he had turned a single beat-up pickup truck into a fleet of 18-wheelers. By 40, Harrington Logistics was moving goods across 48 states, and Richard was worth $100 million. By the time he met Eleanor Ashford at a charity auction in the Hamptons, he was a bona fide billionaire, a man who was used to getting whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted it. Eleanor was different from the women he usually encountered. She wasn't impressed by the private jets or the beachfront properties. She came from an old New England family, the kind of family where money was discussed in hushed tones and reputation meant more than a bank balance. She ran the Harrington Family Foundation, turning it from a tax write-off into a legitimate force for education reform. She was smart, composed, and fiercely loyal. She was also devoted to her younger sister, Lauren. Lauren was the opposite of Eleanor in almost every way. Where Eleanor was measured, Lauren was impulsive. Where Eleanor was grounded, Lauren was restless. She bounced from job to job, from city to city, always chasing something she could never quite catch. Eleanor, being the protective older sister, constantly bailed her out, found her opportunities, gave her a place to land when the world got too hard. When Richard and Eleanor married, Lauren was the maid of honor, beaming in the photos, part of the perfect family portrait. Richard was generous with Lauren, setting up a trust fund for her, giving her a job at a small real estate firm he owned, making sure she felt included. He was the perfect brother-in-law. He was also, it turned out, a man with a wandering eye and a taste for danger. The affair didn't start in a seedy motel. It started in plain sight, in the guest house of the Harrington estate, in the back of Richard's town car, in the empty apartments Lauren was supposed to be selling. It went on for nearly 2 years. 2 years of secret phone calls, of coded text messages, of stolen moments while Eleanor was at board meetings or visiting the schools her foundation funded. They developed a rhythm, a system. Richard would tell Eleanor he had a late meeting with investors. Lauren would tell her sister she had a hot date with a client. They laughed about it, the two of them, about how easy it was to fool the one woman who trusted them both completely. They thought they were invincible. They thought Eleanor was too busy, too naive, too trusting to ever notice. But they forgot one critical thing about Eleanor Harrington. She had built a career out of noticing things. She had to. When you manage a foundation that gives away $50 million a year, you learn to spot the liars, the grifters, the people who smile to your face and steal behind your back. You learn to read people. And on that Tuesday night in October, as she stood at the bottom of the stairs, every detail she had missed for 2 years came flooding back in a single, sickening wave. The way Lauren would linger a little too long when saying goodnight. The way Richard's phone was always face down on the dinner table. The way they'd both disappear for 20 minutes at family gatherings. It was all there. She just hadn't wanted to see it. But now she saw everything. She didn't go to a hotel that night. She went to the one place Richard would never think to look for her. She went to the city, to the apartment of a woman named Claudia Reyes. Claudia was the foundation's lead forensic accountant, a woman with the kind of mind that could spot a discrepancy in a 1,000-page audit from 50 paces. Eleanor showed up at her door at 2 in the morning, composed, dry-eyed, and holding a leather-bound notebook. For the next 6 hours, they didn't talk about Richard. They didn't talk about Lauren. They talked about money. Eleanor had spent 15 years married to a billionaire. She had sat at dinner tables with senators and foreign ministers. She had listened. She knew about the shell companies in the Cayman Islands. She knew about the real estate holdings in London held under a fake corporate entity. She knew about the consulting fees paid to old friends that were really just money laundering for political donations. She knew everything. She just needed Claudia to prove it. And Claudia, who had spent her entire career chasing men like Richard Harrington, was more than happy to oblige. Over the next 3 weeks, while Richard and Lauren basked in their perceived victory, assuming Eleanor was hiding in a hotel somewhere licking her wounds, a small team of investigators was quietly building a case that would bring down not just a man, but an empire. Richard, for his part, played the role of the worried husband perfectly. He called her phone constantly, leaving messages that ranged from concerned to slightly irritated. "Ellie, come on, let's talk about this. You're overreacting. It was a mistake. These things happen." He actually said that. These things happen. As if betraying your wife with her own sister was akin to forgetting to take out the trash. Lauren, predictably, was a mess of apologies and self-pity. She sent texts, long rambling ones, full of excuses and blame shifting. "I'm so broken, Ellie. You know I've always been broken. You just made me feel seen. I'm the victim here too." The victim. She actually called herself the victim. Eleanor read every message, listened to every voicemail. She didn't respond to a single one. She just saved them all. She had a folder on her laptop labeled simply Evidence. It contained screenshots, voicemail recordings, and the letter Lauren sent, that desperate handwritten letter confessing everything in excruciating detail, including the things Richard had told her about his secret accounts, the pillow talk that would ultimately seal his fate. Lauren, in her desperation to be forgiven, had handed her sister the keys to the kingdom. The first public move came 2 months later. It wasn't a divorce filing. It was a letter to the board of Harrington Logistics, signed by Eleanor Harrington and a coalition of minority shareholders she had quietly assembled. The letter demanded a full forensic audit of the company's finances, citing irregularities and potential breaches of fiduciary duty. Richard laughed when he heard about it. He owned 62% of the company. He was the board. He could crush this with a single phone call. But he didn't understand what was happening. This wasn't a lawsuit. This was a signal. Within a week, the Wall Street Journal received a package. Inside were documents, carefully redacted to protect sources, showing a pattern of offshore tax evasion that went back a decade. The documents didn't come from Eleanor directly. They came from an anonymous source, a concerned shareholder. But the information was so specific, so damning, that the SEC had no choice but to open an inquiry. Richard Harrington's stock plummeted 30% in 2 days. His partners started getting nervous calls from their own investors. The empire was cracking. Lauren, meanwhile, was completely exposed. The SEC, hungry for a conviction, offered her immunity in exchange for testimony. She took it. She thought she was saving herself. She sat in a deposition room in downtown Manhattan, under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by federal lawyers, and she told them everything. And when they presented her with her own letter, the one she had written to Eleanor, the one where she detailed the Cayman accounts and the Swiss deposits, she had no choice but to admit it was true. She didn't just testify against Richard. She destroyed him. And in doing so, she destroyed herself. The transcript of her testimony was leaked to the press within hours. The headlines were brutal. Sister's secret letter brings down billionaire. Lauren Ashford became a national punchline, the woman who slept with her sister's husband and then ratted him out to the feds. Her real estate career evaporated. Her so-called friends disappeared. She was utterly alone. Richard's trial was a media circus. The man who had once graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune now appeared in court in an ill-fitting suit, his hair grayer, his face gaunt. The prosecution painted him as a classic corporate sociopath, a man who believed the rules didn't apply to him. His own lawyers tried to paint him as a victim of a vindictive woman, but the evidence was overwhelming. The offshore accounts, the bribes, the testimony of his own mistress. It took the jury 4 days to convict him on 12 counts of fraud and tax evasion. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison. As the bailiff led him away in handcuffs, he scanned the courtroom, looking for Eleanor. He found her in the back row, dressed in a simple gray coat, watching him with an expression that wasn't anger, wasn't sadness, wasn't anything at all. She just looked at him the way you might look at a stranger on the subway. And then she stood up, adjusted her coat, and walked out of the courtroom without a single glance back. You would think that was the end of the story. The wife gets revenge, the husband goes to prison, the sister is ruined. Roll credits. But that's not the end. Because 3 years later, a woman walked into a small coffee shop in Greenwich, Connecticut. She was older now, worn down by life. Her blonde hair faded to gray, her face lined with regret. It was Lauren Ashford. She had spent the last 3 years in obscurity, working odd jobs, living in a tiny apartment, completely cut off from the world she once inhabited. She had heard through the grapevine that Eleanor was doing well, that she had used her settlement money to start her own logistics consulting firm, that she was actually thriving. Lauren needed something. Closure, maybe. Or forgiveness. Or just a chance to look her sister in the eye and say she was sorry. She sent a message, and to her shock, Eleanor agreed to meet her. Lauren got there early, ordered a coffee she couldn't drink, and waited. When Eleanor walked in, Lauren almost didn't recognize her. She looked 10 years younger than she had at the trial. She was wearing an expensive but understated suit, the kind of clothes that whisper money instead of shouting it. She sat down across from Lauren, placed a leather handbag on the chair next to her, and waited. Lauren stumbled through her apology, tears streaming down her face. She talked about how sorry she was, how she had ruined her life, how she had nothing left, how she just wanted her sister back, how she hoped that maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal. She talked for a long time. Eleanor listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't roll her eyes. She just sat there, sipping her water, waiting for Lauren to finish. When Lauren finally ran out of words, there was a long, uncomfortable silence. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her voice low and calm, the same voice she used to read Lauren bedtime stories when they were children. "You want to know if I forgive you?" she asked. Lauren nodded, hope flickering in her eyes for the first time in years. Eleanor smiled, a small, sad smile. "Lauren, I don't forgive you. I don't hate you either. Hate would require me to care about you, and I don't. The truth is, I should thank you. If you hadn't been so desperate, so predictable, so easy to manipulate, I never would have gotten that letter. If you hadn't been so eager to please him, I never would have had the evidence to destroy him. You were the key to the whole thing, Lauren. You handed me the weapon, and I used it. I didn't lose a husband. I gained an empire. So no, I don't forgive you. But I do appreciate your contribution to my success." Lauren sat frozen, her mouth open, her eyes wide with the horrible realization that she had never been the betrayer. She had been the pawn. She had been used by both of them, first by Richard, and then, far more effectively, by her own sister. Eleanor stood up, placed a $20 bill on the table to cover the coffees, and looked down at Lauren one last time. "Take care of yourself, Lauren. Try to find something to do with your life. I won't be thinking about you again." And then she walked out, leaving Lauren sitting alone in that coffee shop, utterly and completely destroyed by the truth. Richard Harrington died in a federal prison medical facility 4 years into his sentence. A heart attack, they said, but really, it was the slow death of a man who had lost everything that ever mattered to him. Lauren Ashford vanished completely, never to be heard from again. And Eleanor Harrington? She built her consulting firm into a multinational powerhouse. She sits on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. She dates, occasionally, but she never remarried. She doesn't need to. She looks out over the Manhattan skyline from her corner office, and she thinks about Richard and Lauren sometimes, not with anger or sadness, but with the mild curiosity of a chess player reviewing a game she won long ago. She didn't just survive their betrayal. She transcended it. She took their worst moment and turned it into her greatest victory. And the most terrifying part of the whole story is that she never raised her voice. She never threw a punch. She just waited, watched, and when the time was right, she moved. That is the power of a woman who has nothing left to lose. That is the story of Eleanor Harrington. And as we close this chapter, we have to ask ourselves a question that lingers long after the screen goes dark. Was she the villain, or was she the hero? Did she go too far, or did she simply play the game better than the men who tried to destroy her? We'd love to know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you thought this story was something, wait until you hear about the tech mogul who tried to cut his wife out of the company he built with her money. That video is coming soon. Subscribe now so you don't miss it. Thanks for watching.